Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for December 14th, 2021. The question I want to address today is, will the Biden administration proceed with the judicial murder of Julian Assange? Last Friday, on December 10th, the British Appeals Court ruled that Assange could be extradited to the United States, where he faces charges of espionage. This ruling can be appealed. It's to be noted that the U.S. Justice Department insisted that the extradition go ahead, and the court ruled that the appeals court ruled that it can take place. It may take 2 more years for further appeals, which means Assange will be left in Belmarsh prison, where he is currently held and is under unsanitary, unsafe conditions. His health is deteriorating. This is clearly a case of judicial murder. Now, what's his crime? Well, he published documents from U.S. agencies, U.S. military publications, which expose war crimes committed by U.S. forces in Iraq. While he's slowly being killed, the people who ordered these crimes are receiving funds as expert commentators on MSNBC and CNN. The hypocrisy here is unbelievable. The criminals go free while the person who exposed them is being subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. If he is extradited, there's no chance for a fair trial. The Justice Department will use the Classified Information Protection Act, which will prevent his defense from being able to provide documents which the judge will probably rule affect U.S. security, might damage U.S. security. Now, this is coming as the United States is grandstanding behind something called the Summit for Democracy, which claims that the world is divided between the authoritarian countries such as Russia, China, Iran, and others, as opposed to democracies headlined by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the NATO countries. But the Assange case demonstrates the utter contempt for freedom of speech and freedom of the press. It's an attack on the constitutional rights that are guaranteed under our Constitution. So where is the rules-based order in the Assange case? We see Blinken running around the world pointing fingers at Russia and China, demanding that military be mobilized around the world to challenge Russia over the fake charges that Putin is about to invade Ukraine or that China is about to invade Taiwan. Well, the media is obviously either intimidated by these threats, looking at the Assange case, or they believe them, they're supporting them. And so there's no effort by the media to get the truth out. Now, murder and destruction were justified by the fake intelligence in Iraq. Is that Blinken's rules-based order? And these are the same networks today which are creating provocations against Russia in eastern Ukraine. Remember, the February 2014 coup in Ukraine was funded by the U.S. government. Victoria Nuland, who oversaw it, who's a top person in the State Department today, admitted that the U.S. government spent $5 billion to topple the Yanukovych regime. So the U.S. supported regime change. So did George Soros. So did neo-Nazis of the Azov Battalion and other right-wing forces inside Ukraine, who are now in the government's defense and security forces pressing the issue of confrontation with the ethnic Russians who live in eastern Ukraine. So this is where we see the fraud of the narrative around democracy. Now, let's compare something where Russia is being sanctioned for its treatment of Navalny, a so-called Russian dissident. But there's a videotape of Navalny's chief lieutenant meeting with British embassy officials asking for $14 million to help destabilize the Russian government. That's an example of a Navalny crony going to a foreign power to ask for money for a destabilization effort. Now, how is that covered by democracy? When the Russian government presses charges against Navalny, they're accused of authoritarianism, of being an autocracy. But what about the case of Assange, where it's a clear example of oppression and violation of free speech? There was a mobilization toward the end of Donald Trump's administration asking that he act to free Assange from these charges. That he could have asked the Justice Department to drop the charges, or he could have given a pretrial pardon to Assange. He did not. At the same time, he did pardon Steve Bannon, a grifter, a snake oil salesman, who raised millions of dollars from Trump supporters and had charges against him for misappropriating those funds that were supposed to go to build the wall for his own personal use. And yet Donald Trump pardoned Bannon and did not act on Assange. Well, some people speculate that this was an acquiescence to his Secretary of State and former CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, who was reported in Yahoo News on September 26th of this year as having been carrying out plans to kidnap and assassinate Assange. So again, the corruption from the U.S. side goes to the top. In this case, Pompeo and Trump's turning a blind eye to that, while Biden now is pressing ahead, according to all reports, with the prosecution of Assange. There's no indication that Biden will intervene to stop this. If he does not intervene to stop it, it's further evidence to the whole world of the fraud that the United States is the leader of the democracies. And this idea that you have a division between the democracies and the autocracies, this is a new wrinkle in the old British geopolitical doctrine of dividing the world into competing empires, the good versus the bad, and using that to justify all kinds of violations of freedom in the so-called democracies. We see censorship in the United States. We see the fraud being carried out in the whole promotion of this idea that we're the democracy and Russia is the evil one. The intelligence reports, which claimed 180,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, which were hyped day after day leading up to the Putin-Biden summit. And yet the CIA director, Burns, said there were only 70,000 troops. And why were the troops there? Because the U.S. is providing lethal weapons to Ukraine to put into the hands of the neo-Nazis whose ancestors exterminated Jews, Russians, Poles, Hungarians, and others when they worked for the Nazi SS in World War II. So this is where you see the fraud of the Summit for Democracy. We're mobilizing on a number of fronts at the Schiller Institute. But one of the things we're requesting is that people intervene to expose this fraud and mobilize for the freeing of Julian Assange. This is not just about Assange. It's about the idea that you have the right to express a different opinion without having the full weight of the Justice Department, the U.S. military, and the media turned against you. We're not a free society if this kind of activity can be carried out against a publisher who committed no crime of Julian Assange. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.